He whispered just 7 words and changed everything. When a struggling single dad stopped a runaway wheelchair in the middle of a crowded mall, no one expected what came next. Especially not the billionaire mother who had given up on miracles until he looked her in the eyes and said, "I can make your daughter walk again." What followed wasn't science. It wasn't magic. It was something far more powerful: trust. If stories of love, redemption, and quiet miracles speak to your heart, we invite you to subscribe and walk this journey with us. Your presence here means more than you know. Now let's begin. The moment it happened, everything slowed. The chatter of shoppers in the Denver Galleria hushed into a dull hum, like someone turned the volume knob to mute. A small child's scream pierced the frozen moment, sharp and desperate. The scream came from a girl, maybe 6, no older than 7, hurtling down the wide marble stairs in a wheelchair that had broken free from its handler. Her arms flailed, her tiny voice cracked, and the world held its breath. Daniel Cooper didn't think. He reacted. His body launched forward from the smoothie counter, sending his delivery bag flying. The cashier yelled something behind him, but he didn't hear. His boots pounded against tile. 10 feet. 5. He braced. Then impact. He caught the chair just as its front wheels caught the edge of the top stair. The force knocked him backward. The steel footrests slammed into his shins, and the weight of the girl's body twisted awkwardly in the harness. The chair tipped. He wrapped both arms around her and threw his back against the floor. His skull thudded on the cold marble. He saw stars, but the girl was still in his arms, shaking, breathless, unharmed. Gasps filled the air. A security guard rushed over. So did a tall woman in a tailored winter coat, and panic carved across her sharp features. "Oh my God, Aurora!" the woman shouted, dropping to her knees. Her hands trembled as she reached for the child. "I didn't mean to let go it." Just the nanny babbled, trailing behind. Daniel let go slowly, carefully. He sat up and winced. "She's okay. Just shaken?" The little girl was crying now, not from pain but from the rush of terror that finally caught up. Her mother wrapped her tightly in a hug, and for a moment Daniel had to look away. The intimacy of it, the fierce primal protection, was something he remembered all too well. "Thank you," the woman said, turning to him now. "You saved her." Daniel stood, brushing dust from his jeans. His delivery shirt was wrinkled, sweat dampened. Anyone would have done the same. "No," she said, voice low. "Not everyone would throw themselves down a stairwell." He half smiled. "Well, I've got a habit of falling hard when it counts." The woman blinked, then let out a breath that could have been a laugh if it weren't so shaken. "You're hurt." "I've had worse," Daniel replied. He moved his arm and grimaced. His elbow would bruise for sure. The girl's eyes, bright sky blue, studied him. "You jumped like Superman," she whispered. Daniel crouched beside her, still catching his breath. "Superman wishes he had half your courage." Her smile was faint, fragile, but there. The woman stood again, businesslike, now shielding vulnerability behind steel composure. "I'm Charlotte West." That name rang a bell. Big one. Charlotte West, the CEO of Westbridge Health Systems, one of the most powerful private medical networks in the country. Billionaire, reclusive, fierce in boardrooms. Her name was inked on Fortune and Forbes more than once. Daniel suddenly felt very aware of his worn boots, his delivery badge, his paycheck-to-paycheck existence. "Daniel Cooper," he said, simply offering a hand. "Part-time hero, full-time delivery guy." Her handshake was firm. "Let me compensate you for what you did. That was beyond brave." "I don't want money," he said quickly, instinctively. "But maybe." Charlotte raised a brow. Daniel looked down at Aurora, his voice lowered, gentler now. "Maybe you'd let me try something else." Charlotte's guard went up again. What do you mean? He hesitated, then said it. I think I can help your daughter walk again. The words hung in the air, audacious and impossible. She stared at him, blinking slowly. Excuse me. I know how that sounds, he said, but I used to be a neuromuscular rehab coach. I worked with kids like her before. He cleared his throat. Before I left the profession. Charlotte's eyes narrowed, evaluating him the way she might, a venture pitch with too many risks. Why did you leave? He didn't answer right away. Because I failed someone who trusted me. My daughter. A silence stretched between them, heavy as thunderclouds. Charlotte looked down at her child. Aurora has had 5 surgeries, spinal muscular nerve mapping, everything science has to offer. None of it has worked. I'm not offering science, Daniel said. I'm offering something else. Consistency. Belief. A second chance maybe for both of us. She studied him again, longer this time. Her lips parted, then closed. Security arrived with a first aid kit. The nanny hovered. The crowd had mostly dispersed. Charlotte helped her daughter back into the chair. Give me your number, she said finally. Daniel nodded, pulling out his phone with a stiff hand. You really think she can walk? Charlotte asked, softer now. He met her gaze, steady and sure. I don't make promises, but I've seen what belief can do. Charlotte turned away, adjusting Aurora's blanket. Daniel watched them go, the billionaire with the guarded heart, and the little girl with stars in her eyes. And somewhere buried beneath the weight of his own regrets, something in him stirred again. Hope. Charlotte West didn't give her number to strangers, not to journalists, not to CEOs who wanted joint ventures, not to mayors asking for campaign donations. But that night, she found herself sitting alone in her penthouse apartment phone, glowing in her hand, with the name Daniel Cooper saved in her contacts. She had Googled him, of course. It was reflex by now. She verified identities faster than her security team did. His name turned up a handful of old local news clips from 8 years ago. Rehabilitation coach wins grant for pediatric motor development research. Read one. Another more recent was Darker Father Mourns. Daughter lost in tragic gym accident. She closed the browser. There was something dangerous about looking too long into someone else's pain, like you might find your own staring back. Aurora had long been asleep, tucked under her weighted blanket with her favorite music box playing. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. Charlotte hadn't known true peace in years, only silence. She poured a glass of wine, then didn't drink it. Her mind kept circling back to the moment on those stairs. Not just the chaos, but the way he'd held Aurora. With arms wide open, not protective, but believing. As if he knew she could fly and only needed someone to break her fall once. That night, for the first time in months, Charlotte didn't work late. Meanwhile, Daniel sat on the edge of a sagging couch in his one-bedroom apartment, above an old violin repair shop. His arm throbbed from the stairwell impact, but he didn't bother icing it. Instead, he stared at the old photo of his daughter, Sophie. 7 years old, standing with her arms out like wings on the beach in Oregon. The photo was bent at the corners. A thumbprint smeared the edge from when he couldn't stop crying long enough to wipe his hands clean. He hadn't opened that memory box in months, maybe longer. He did tonight. Her drawings. The broken bracelet she made him in first grade. A sticky note with the words, "You make me brave." Sophie, age 6. He closed the lid slowly. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Tomorrow, 4:00 p.m. Our home, please be on time. No greeting. No name. No thank you. But he smiled anyway. Charlotte's house wasn't just a home. It was a fortress disguised in elegance. White stone floor-to-ceiling windows, and a gate that looked like it could keep out a revolution. Daniel stood in front of it in his best clothes, not much different from his usual, but cleaner. Ironed. Respectable. A security camera blinked. The gate opened. The woman who greeted him wasn't Charlotte, but a sharp-eyed assistant in her 30s named Gwen. "You'll be with Miss West and Aurora in the greenhouse. Shoes off inside." "Try not to look too surprised," noted, Daniel said with a nod. Inside the house smelled like lavender and order. Not a single photo on the walls, only curated artwork and glass surfaces polished to a shine. They walked through a hallway until Gwen opened double doors, revealing a warm, sun-drenched room filled with greenery. Soft carpets and the sound of classical piano from hidden speakers. Aurora sat in a low lounge chair sketching. Charlotte sat nearby reading a medical journal. Daniel stepped in quietly. Aurora looked up, her eyes lit. "Hi, Superman." He smiled. "Hey, Braveheart." Charlotte didn't rise, but she closed her journal and gestured to the seat across from her. "You said you used to be in pediatric rehab." "I was," Daniel replied, lowering himself onto the chair. "Before I left." "Why did you really leave?" This time he answered without deflecting. "My daughter died during a therapy session. I was her therapist." A heavy pause fell. She had a minor spinal condition, nothing critical. But I pushed too hard that day. She fainted, fell backwards, struck her head. His voice cracked only slightly. She never woke up. Aurora had stopped drawing. She was listening. Charlotte studied him, not with judgment, but with a surgeon's precision cutting through everything that wasn't truth. "And you think helping my daughter will bring her back?" she asked. "No," Daniel said quietly, "but I think it might bring me back." Another silence, longer, more weighted. Charlotte turned to Aurora. "Do you want to try this?" The little girl gave a shy nod. "Only if we can do music too." Daniel smiled. "Deal." The first session wasn't much, just breathing, laughter, posture, alignment through gentle visualization. But Charlotte noticed something. Aurora didn't flinch the way she usually did. She wasn't afraid to try. She asked questions. She reached out. Daniel never touched her without asking, never barked instructions. He guided like water around stone, persistent but patient. At one point, he crouched beside Charlotte as Aurora practiced lifting her arms. "Your daughter's mind is brilliant, but the body only follows when the soul feels safe. That's what I'm building first." Charlotte didn't answer, but her eyes softened, and she stayed until the end of the session. That night, Charlotte sat alone again, but this time she opened her laptop not to check stock trends, but to reread an old email draft. It was a resignation letter she'd written 3 years ago, the night after Aurora's final surgery failed. In it, she wrote, "I no longer believe in recovery, only in endurance." She deleted it. Then she wrote a new note to herself. "Maybe belief is a form of love. Maybe that's what we've been missing." 3 sessions in, Aurora laughed. Not a polite giggle. Not the shy half-smile she used around strangers. A full, chest-deep, bubbling laugh that made her eyes squint and her shoulders shake. Daniel had just tripped on a yoga strap, exaggerated his fall with dramatic flair, and landed flat on the playmat with a loud oof worthy of a cartoon. Aurora clapped her hands, breathless with joy. Charlotte, standing by the French doors, froze. That laugh, it pierced something. She hadn't heard it in over a year. She remembered it from another time, before surgeries, before painkillers, before Aurora learned to watch life from the sidelines instead of running with it. Charlotte had captured that laugh on a phone video once during a beach trip. She'd watched it again and again in the hospital waiting room, afraid she'd never hear it live again. And now, there it was. Real. Loud. Free. Daniel sat up, slowly grinning as he rubbed his elbow. "Told you I'm better at falling than standing." "You're not supposed to fall," Aurora giggled. "Neither are you," he replied, smiling. But here we are, making a habit of getting back up anyway. Charlotte didn't say anything. She couldn't trust her voice. Later that afternoon, after Gwen helped Aurora to the living room for her post-therapy nap, Charlotte invited Daniel to stay for coffee. It was the first time she'd done that. They sat at a small glass table overlooking the garden. Sunlight cut through the clouds, casting gold streaks across the stone patio. I'll admit something Charlotte said, stirring cream into her cup. When I first saw you, I thought you were reckless, untrained, maybe even unstable. Daniel chuckled softly. That's fair. But now, she continued, watching the steam curl above the mug, I'm seeing something different. You aren't trying to fix Aurora. You're trying to know her. That's because she's not broken, he said. Charlotte looked at him surprised. I don't see a girl in a wheelchair, Daniel continued. I see a person whose body is speaking a different language, and no one's listened long enough to understand her dialect. Charlotte stared down at her coffee. No doctor's ever said that to me, she murmured. That's because they talk to scans, he replied. I talk to kids. She hesitated, then reached into her folder and pulled out a document. This was her latest assessment. 2 neurologists confirmed that her lower spinal nerves aren't firing in coordination. The odds of her walking unaided are less than 5%. Daniel read the report in silence, then folded it carefully and slid it back toward her. I'm not here for odds. What are you here for? She asked. He paused, then said something that startled even himself, redemption. Charlotte didn't respond at first. The word hung between them like incense, slow rising, impossible to ignore. He added, helping your daughter won't bring mine back. I know that. But maybe it brings me back, piece by piece. Charlotte nodded slowly, then reached into her briefcase and handed him a neatly bound proposal. What's this, an offer, she said, to come on board officially. As a consultant to Aurora's care team, I'll compensate you well. Benefits, resources, a rehab space built to your design. Daniel didn't take the folder. He looked at her with steady eyes. That's not what I asked for. You want to keep this casual? She asked, surprised. No, I want it to be human. Charlotte leaned back, wary again. What does that mean? It means no contracts, no teams, just you, me, and Aurora. You don't need a consultant, Charlotte. You need someone willing to be present every day, even when there's no measurable progress. Someone who doesn't need to prove anything except that hope is worth showing up for. She looked at him for a long moment, and then for the first time she smiled. Not the tight, PR-trained smile she wore at charity galas. A real one, the kind that made her look 10 years younger. All right, she said. We do it your way. But one condition. What's that? You have to keep making her laugh. Daniel grinned. That, I can guarantee. From that day forward, things changed. Every morning, Daniel arrived with a small object in his backpack, sometimes a toy, sometimes a song lyric, sometimes a riddle. He never repeated the same warm-up twice. Aurora began to look forward to their sessions with growing excitement. Her posture improved. Her core engagement, previously flat despite years of therapy, began to show subtle responsiveness. And something else shifted too. Charlotte, once a bystander, began joining the sessions, at first just watching, then offering music choices, then kneeling beside Aurora during balance exercises, holding her hand as Daniel guided her weight shifts. One morning, after a particularly challenging movement, Aurora collapsed onto the mat, frustrated. I can't do it, she cried. Charlotte moved toward her, but before she could speak, Daniel knelt. You don't have to do it yet, he said. You just have to believe your body will listen to you again. Aurora sniffled, but what if it doesn't? Then we keep whispering to it, Daniel said softly, until it hears us. Charlotte felt something swell in her chest. Gratitude, or maybe just the painful, beautiful ache of watching someone see your child as more than a case file. That night, as she watched Aurora sleep, Charlotte sat by the window and opened her old medical journal for the first time in 2 years. Inside, she wrote a single line in the margins of a page, once filled with clinical notes. Hope is not a treatment plan, but maybe it's the beginning of one. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the past came knocking. The session had gone well. Aurora had managed to balance upright for nearly 20 seconds without hand support, her longest to date. Daniel marked it not with applause, but with quiet pride and a fist bump. "That's a new personal record," he said, ruffling her hair. Aurora beamed. "Does this mean I'll be walking soon?" He crouched beside her. "It means your body's listening. That's the first step." But while Aurora's excitement filled the sunroom, Charlotte stood by the windows still. Her gaze fixed not on her daughter's progress, but on Daniel. She had Googled him again, deeper this time. Not just local news, but archived medical board records, sports rehabilitation reports, and buried in a legal docket a wrongful death suit filed against the gym he had worked for. The case was settled out of court. No criminal charges filed, but the detail stuck with her. The girl's name was Sophie Cooper, 7 years old. Fell during balance training, severe head trauma, non-responsive, declared brain dead within 48 hours. It made her sick to her stomach. Not because she believed Daniel was dangerous, but because she knew exactly what that kind of guilt could do to a person. After the session, when Aurora had gone down for her nap and Daniel was packing up, Charlotte gestured for him to follow her to the kitchen. "I read about Sophie," she said softly without preamble. Daniel froze in the doorway. The air shifted. "I wasn't snooping," she continued. "I needed to know." He set his bag down. His voice was quiet. "Of course you did." Charlotte leaned on the marble island. "I lost a patient once, 15 years ago. Pediatric seizure. I missed a subtle sign. The team was too slow to respond." He coded on the table. Daniel said nothing. "I quit surgery after that, switched to hospital management, said I could do more good on a systems level. But really," she exhaled, "I just couldn't touch another child again. Not with these hands." Daniel slowly sat down on one of the bar stools. "They don't teach you how to live with it. The part of grief that isn't sadness, it's shame." She nodded. "It lingers in strange places. I couldn't hold Aurora without thinking of that boy. Couldn't watch a heart monitor without hearing that flatline tone." There was a long silence. Then Daniel said, "Sophie loved treehouses. We were building one that summer. She had these grand plans, rope ladder, lemonade stand, a no grown-ups allowed sign." His voice cracked. "I never finished it." Charlotte's eyes burned, but she didn't blink. "I kept asking myself what I missed," he said. "What tiny thing I didn't see." "But you can't undo a moment. Only try to live a better one next time." She swallowed. "That's why you came after Aurora on those stairs." I didn't think he said. I just saw a child about to fall, and I knew I couldn't let it happen again. Charlotte's voice lowered. "And now you're here, trying to give my daughter what you lost." Daniel looked up at her steady. "No, I'm not giving your daughter anything. She's earning every step. I'm just here to walk beside her." Those words reached somewhere deep in Charlotte, beneath the polished composure, past the clinical detachment, into the part of her that once believed she could heal anyone. That part had been asleep for years. Now it stirred. The following day, Charlotte entered the sunroom early. Aurora was still getting dressed, so Daniel sat cross-legged reviewing his notes. Charlotte approached quietly, holding a small velvet pouch. "I want to show you something," she said, offering the pouch. Inside was a gold necklace with a tiny surgical scalpel charm, its edge dulled symbolic. An engraving on the back read, "Do no harm. Heal with hope." It was a gift from my residency mentor, she explained. He gave it to me the day I performed my first solo operation. I haven't worn it since I left the OR. Daniel handed it back gently. "Why show it to me?" "Because I think I'm starting to believe again," she said. "In healing. Not just bodies, but lives." That day's session was unusually quiet. Aurora seemed distracted, more introspective than usual. When Daniel asked what was on her mind, she looked up and said, "Do you think Sophie would have liked me?" Daniel blinked. "I think she would have loved you." Aurora smiled softly. "Sometimes I feel like she's helping me, like she's whispering to my legs." He swallowed the lump in his throat. "Maybe she is." Charlotte sat silently in the background, one hand covering her mouth, holding an emotion too raw to name. Later that night, Charlotte sat in her home office laptop, open but forgotten. She scrolled through old photos, Aurora as a baby Aurora after her first surgery, Aurora in casts, wheelchairs, hospital gowns. But none of the photos showed what she saw today, a child who believed she could move again. She opened a blank document and began typing slowly. Memo proposal for Westbridge. Pediatric Trust Initiative. Objective: establish funding for non-traditional rehabilitation models, integrating music, emotional therapy, and consistent relational coaching. Pilot patient Aurora West. Lead consultant Daniel Cooper. Status already in motion. She saved it, closed the laptop, then sat still for a long time, listening to the soft sound of her daughter's breathing through the baby monitor still on her desk, even though Aurora hadn't needed it in years. In a world that often praised results over relationships, Charlotte was learning the power of simply being there, of staying, of whispering hope until someone's body, someone's soul heard it. And somewhere in the deepest parts of her carefully guarded heart, she began to wonder, was it possible that she too could learn to walk again, not with her legs, but with her trust? Daniel had learned something about trust over the years. It wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself with grand gestures or tearful revelations. It crept in quietly like sunlight, finding its way through a window someone thought they'd sealed shut. That's how it was with Charlotte. She hadn't said the word, not once. But every day she stayed through the sessions, every time she smiled, when Aurora giggled, every question she asked Daniel about muscles and nerves and emotional neuroplasticity. It all whispered the same thing: I'm trying. And for Daniel, that was enough. That morning, Aurora insisted on showing Daniel her supersuit, a purple tracksuit with silver stars stitched down the sleeves. "It gives me balance powers," she explained solemnly. Daniel bowed theatrically. "I'm honored to train a superhero." Charlotte watched from the doorway, arms crossed loosely. She wasn't in a suit today. No heels, no tailored blazer. Just jeans and a soft sweater, her hair pulled back. Daniel noticed. Not with judgment, with gratitude. It meant something when people like her let down their armor. Today's session focused on lateral core control. Aurora stood between parallel bars, while Daniel encouraged her to shift her weight side to side. Each movement was more than a few inches, but it took enormous focus. Charlotte knelt beside her, not instructing, just being there. "Do I look silly?" Aurora asked after a shaky moment. Daniel shook his head. "You look like someone who hasn't given up. That's my favorite kind of person." Aurora grinned. Even more than superheroes, especially more than superheroes. They usually have stunt doubles. That made her laugh again, quick, bright, and unguarded. After the session, Charlotte surprised Daniel with a question as they cleared the mats. Have you ever considered teaching again, formally? Daniel paused, hand resting on a resistance band. You mean like rehab instruction? She nodded. There are schools that need mentors with hands-on experience. I could make introductions. He gave her a small, grateful smile. I'm not sure I'm ready to stand in front of a room full of students. One child is enough for now. Charlotte studied him. You're good at this. I'm just remembering how to care out loud, he said. This work, it's not a profession. It's a relationship. Her brow furrowed. That's not how the medical system sees it. That's the problem, he replied. She didn't argue. Not because she agreed yet, but because something about the way he said it made her wonder if she wanted to. That afternoon, Charlotte took Aurora to the backyard, something she hadn't done in months. The autumn air was crisp, the trees gold-tipped and rustling. Aurora sat on a picnic blanket and asked to draw. Charlotte handed her the sketch pad and a new set of markers. What should I draw? Whatever makes you feel strong, Charlotte said. Aurora began sketching. 30 minutes later, she held it up. It was a picture of Daniel holding her hands as she stood. Charlotte was beside them, smiling. But what struck Charlotte most was the detail her own face looked soft. Not cold. Not distracted. You made me beautiful, Charlotte said. Aurora looked confused. You already are. Charlotte swallowed hard and pulled her daughter close. That evening, Daniel lingered after the session. They stood in the kitchen again, 2 mugs of peppermint tea between them. Charlotte spoke first. I don't know how to say this, but I feel different. Lighter. Like there's room to breathe again. He didn't rush her, just listened. I've spent years thinking everything had to be measurable, predictable, controlled, she continued. But you've taught me that healing isn't always scientific. Sometimes it's relational, even spiritual. Daniel looked at her thoughtfully. It's okay to want both. I'm still not sure how to balance it. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just honor both sides when they show up. They stood there in companionable silence for a moment, sipping tea. Then Charlotte looked at him and asked quietly, Does it ever stop hurting? He didn't pretend to misunderstand. No, he said. But it changes. The grief doesn't shrink, but you grow around it. You stop trying to outrun it. You learn to walk beside it. Charlotte nodded slowly, tears pooling at the corners of her eyes. I don't talk to anyone about it. Not really. I built this company, managed thousands of people. But sometimes I feel like I'm still stuck in that OR watching a flatline. Daniel reached across the counter, not touching her, just placing his hand close enough to be a presence. You're not alone in that room anymore. The next day, Charlotte gave Daniel a key. To the garden gate, she explained a little awkwardly. So you don't have to wait at the front every morning. Daniel accepted it without ceremony, but the gesture meant more than she knew. It was the first key someone had given him in nearly 7 years. Not to a house, but to belonging. That evening, Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, guitar in hand. He strummed softly the same melody he'd played for Sophie when she had trouble sleeping. His apartment was still small, still quiet, but his world was beginning to sound different. He wasn't living in the aftermath anymore. He was living in the middle of something again, something alive, something possible. The first sign came quietly, a flash of a camera, a long lens click from behind a hedge, then the hush of someone ducking out of sight. Daniel had noticed, but said nothing. He assumed it was a nosy neighbor. Charlotte's estate sat on a hilltop with sweeping views and a security gate, but fame had a way of leaking through cracks, no matter how tightly sealed. It wasn't until 3 days later, when his phone buzzed with a dozen unread messages, that he realized the storm had arrived. Headline: Billionaire West hires unlicensed therapist to treat disabled daughter in secret beneath it. Grainy photos, Daniel holding Aurora's hands near the garden path, Charlotte watching from the bench. One picture had been taken through the window, catching Charlotte mid-laugh, something Daniel had only recently learned to recognize on her face. The article was filled with assumptions and half-truths. They called Daniel a disgraced trainer with a tragic past. They accused Charlotte of endangering her daughter. They mocked the use of emotional therapy as pseudoscience. By the time Daniel finished reading, his hands were shaking. Charlotte didn't answer his first call, nor the second. He was halfway to her house when his phone finally rang. "Don't come to the house," she said sharply. "Charlotte, I'm handling it. My PR team is drafting a statement. Legal's already involved. I need time. Time for what?" "For this to quiet down," she snapped, "before the board hears and makes it worse." There was silence on the line. Daniel's voice softened. "We knew this could happen, but hiding now, it's not going to protect her." "You don't understand," she said. "This isn't just a story. It's my company, my credibility. And if this spreads, if they think I'm unstable or reckless, they'll vote to remove me. I could lose everything." Daniel closed his eyes. "And what about Aurora?" Charlotte didn't answer right away. "She's fine," she finally said. "She's too young to understand." "She understands more than you think." A beat passed. Then she added quietly, "Please, Daniel, just give me a few days. No sessions, no visits. Let me get ahead of it." And then click. The line went dead. He stood alone in the parking lot of a gas station off Highway 285, phone still in hand, as a wind stirred the early November air. The ache that bloomed in his chest wasn't rage. It was something more dangerous. Disappointment. Not in Charlotte. In hope. He'd let himself believe that what they were building was strong enough to weather anything. He'd forgotten even the most beautiful beginnings were fragile. At the estate, Charlotte sat at her desk, blinds drawn, eyes glued to a spreadsheet she wasn't reading. Across the room, Gwen hovered with a printed copy of the article and a schedule full of board calls. Charlotte's fingers gripped the pen so hard her knuckles turned white. "Should I issue the rebuttal now?" Gwen asked gently. Charlotte didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on a single sentence buried in the article, a mother desperate for a miracle grasping at ghosts. It wasn't the accusation that stung. It was the echo of her own fear. Because deep down she was desperate. And maybe Daniel was her ghost. A living reminder of every mistake she'd buried beneath success. Her voice broke the silence. "Cancel the rebuttal." "Are you sure?" Charlotte nodded. "No counterattack?" "Not yet." Gwen hesitated, then added carefully, "Aurora's been asking when Daniel's coming back." Charlotte's jaw tightened. "Tell her he's busy." 2 days passed. The house grew quieter. Aurora grew quieter. She didn't laugh during cartoons. She didn't ask to paint. She didn't want music. When Charlotte tried to suggest a walk outside, Aurora refused. "I don't want to practice without him," she said. Charlotte sat beside her on the floor, fingers brushing through her daughter's hair. "You know Mommy's trying to fix things, right?" Aurora looked up with eyes too wise for her age. "Then why does it feel like you broke something?" Charlotte closed her eyes and realized her daughter did understand. That night, Charlotte stood outside staring at the garden path where Daniel used to kneel beside Aurora, encouraging her to lean into belief. She thought of her own hands, capable of slicing into a brain with millimeter precision, but helpless when it came to protecting the one thing she loved most. And slowly, almost reluctantly, she pulled out her phone. She typed, "I was wrong. She misses you." "I do too." Then deleted it. Typed again. "If hope can survive scandal, can you come back?" Deleted that too. In the end, she sent only, "She asked about you again. Tomorrow at 4 p.m. Daniel stood outside the gate the next day, unsure if she would really let him in. To his surprise, Gwen opened it with a nod and a small smile. "She's not great at apologies," Gwen whispered. "But this is her way." He nodded, grateful beyond words. Inside, Aurora was already waiting, sitting on the mat in her superhero suit, a little wrinkled, but proud. "You're late," she said, arms crossed. Daniel crouched down. "I had to fight a few dragons to get here. Did you win?" "Let's find out." He turned to Charlotte, who stood in the doorway uncertain. He said nothing. She said nothing. But when she stepped inside and knelt beside Aurora, she didn't speak like a CEO or a strategist or a woman who controlled every variable. She simply said, "We missed you." Daniel smiled. Some storms passed without warning, but sometimes what survived after was stronger than before. Daniel had always believed grief was a silent companion. It didn't arrive screaming. It settled in like dust on forgotten furniture. You stopped seeing it, but it was always there, layered, patient, waiting for the right slant of light to stir it back into the air. And now it had found its moment. 2 days after he returned to the West Estate, Daniel stood at the edge of the greenhouse, while Aurora practiced weight shifting between a set of custom-designed bars. She was stronger. That much was clear. Her movements had more confidence, her frame more control. But her eyes kept darting to him, checking. "Steady," Daniel said gently. "Like you're hugging the wind." Aurora grinned. "The wind can't be hugged. You'd be surprised what soft things can do." Charlotte watched, nearby, arms folded, face calm. But Daniel could sense something in her today, an energy that wasn't there before. Tired, yes, but also tender. Not from defeat, from surrender. Not to fear, to trust. After the session, while Gwen took Aurora inside for lunch, Charlotte remained behind. "Would you like to stay a bit?" she asked. "I'm making soup." He blinked. "Soup? I may not be able to walk a child through motor rehab," she said, "but I can make a mean butternut squash." He smiled. "I'm not sure I trust anyone who says mean and squash in the same sentence," but he followed her inside anyway. In the kitchen, sunlight spilled across stone countertops. Charlotte moved with quiet precision, chopping, stirring, seasoning. It reminded Daniel of watching his own mother cook, how her silence had often said more than her words. "You're good at this," he said, sipping a glass of water. "I like things that simmer," she replied. "They teach patience." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "That's what healing is, too." A long simmer. A pause. Then Charlotte asked, "Have you been back to Oregon since?" "No," Daniel said, setting down the glass. "I kept meaning to, but every year it got harder." "Do you still talk to her?" she asked softly. He gave a small nod, not out loud. "But, yes." Charlotte set down the ladle and turned to him. "Can I ask something? Personal?" "Sure." "Do you ever write to her?" He hesitated, the air around him shifting. "Yes," he said. Finally. "I used to, every week, for almost a year. Then I stopped." Why, Daniel looked down at his hands, because I thought healing meant letting go. And now he looked back at her. "Now I think healing means making room." Charlotte held his gaze for a moment, then quietly left the kitchen. When she returned, she was holding a worn, pale blue envelope. Edges, creased ink, faded. "I found this last week," she said, "in Aurora's old nursery. I think it belongs to you." Daniel took it slowly. It was the letter he'd written to Sophie. Never mailed, never burned, just left behind during a time when everything had blurred. He opened it, hands trembling. "Dear Sophie, it's morning and your room is too quiet. I still expect to hear you singing off-key while brushing your hair. I failed you. I know everyone says it wasn't my fault, but I was there. I was the one who told you to push through. I thought being brave meant trying harder. Now I think being brave means knowing when to stop. I miss you, baby girl. I miss you every second, and I promise, if I ever have the chance to help another child feel what you felt when you flew across that rope swing, I'll do it. Not to make up for losing you, but to honor that joy. Love, always, Dad. Daniel folded the letter slowly, tears blurring the edges. Charlotte didn't speak. She simply reached for his hand, not in comfort, but in acknowledgement. Grief, after all, didn't want fixing. It wanted company. That evening, Daniel stayed for dinner. Not as a consultant, not as a guest, as a part of something that no longer needed defining. Aurora sat between them, chattering about the coloring contest she planned to enter the leaf she'd found that looked like a heart, and how standing practice made her feel like a tall sunflower. "She's so alive," Daniel said later, as they watched her sleep through the baby monitor in Charlotte's office. "She's always been alive," Charlotte whispered, "but now, she's growing." They sat in silence a while longer, the warmth of the day still lingering. Finally, Charlotte said, "I think I'd like to write a letter." Daniel looked at her. "To who?" She hesitated, then answered softly, "To myself, to the version of me who thought survival was enough." Daniel nodded. "That's a good place to start." That night, Daniel returned home carrying the letter like something sacred. He didn't place it in a drawer. He framed it, hung it above his desk. Not as a shrine to the past, but as a commitment to the present. To walk beside pain, to whisper hope, to love with hands that had once let go. Because love, real love, didn't erase what was lost. It made space for something new to grow in its place. By December, the days had grown short, and the air crisp, with a quiet kind of anticipation. Snow had not yet fallen, but the sky often held a promise of it, pale and expectant. Inside the West Estate, however, warmth lingered. Not just in temperature, but in tone rhythm, and something else Daniel couldn't quite name. Something that felt like the beginning of trust, transforming into belonging. It started with a question. They were in the greenhouse, Aurora finishing her leg stretches, Daniel kneeling nearby, Charlotte sitting cross-legged with her laptop open, though she hadn't typed anything in 10 minutes. "Would you ever do this?" "Bigger," she asked. Daniel looked up. "Bigger." She closed the laptop. "What we're doing here, what you've built with Aurora. What if it wasn't just for one child?" Daniel considered it. "You mean a clinic?" She nodded. "Or a center. Something hybrid. Not just physical rehab, but integrated care. Emotional, spiritual, sensory-based, family-inclusive. Something that honors a child as a whole person." He exhaled slowly. "You've been thinking about this." "I've been watching it work." Aurora grinned from the mat. "You mean I'm famous?" Charlotte smiled. "You're the prototype." Daniel leaned back, his palms resting on the floor. "You know the system will hate it." "I don't care about the system," she said. "I care about results." He met her eyes. "You mean you care about people?" Her gaze softened. "Yes. I think, maybe for the first time in a long while, I do." They spent the following week sketching ideas in the evenings, after Aurora had gone to bed. What had begun as informal chats over tea evolved into late-night brainstorming sessions, with legal pads, sticky notes, and an old whiteboard from Charlotte's storage room. They argued about layout, staffing, accessibility. They laughed about acronyms, marketing slogans, even a terrible logo Daniel had drawn that looked more like a spaceship than a center for kids. But underneath it all was a growing rhythm, a shared momentum. Not just of a project, but of them. One evening, as Charlotte scribbled design notes, she paused and looked up. Can I ask you something personal? Daniel raised a brow. You've seen me cry, remember? She smiled gently. You never talk about Sophie's mother. I didn't want to pry, but... He nodded slowly. That's fair. He leaned back in the chair, fingers laced behind his head. Her name was Elise. We were college sweethearts. Married too young. Sophie came 2 years later, and for a while it was... golden. He paused. After the accident, she couldn't look at me. I couldn't blame her. I couldn't look at me either. We tried to hold on, but grief has a way of cracking things already too thin. Charlotte said nothing, just waited. She moved to Florida, remarried. We don't talk much. I think we both needed to build lives the other didn't haunt. Charlotte reached for her mug. I'm sorry. Daniel shook his head. Don't be. Some endings are necessary to make room for healing. She looked at him closely. Have you? He smiled faintly. I'm learning to. Charlotte nodded slowly, then whispered, Me too. That Sunday, Daniel arrived early with a surprise, a small keyboard he'd picked up from a local thrift store. Nothing fancy, just something Aurora could use to explore sound and rhythm. She loves melody, he said. Music activates more regions of the brain than movement alone. If we pair the two, we might see a jump in response. Charlotte stood beside him as Aurora tested the keys. You really believe that, don't you? She asked. I believe in connection, he said. The brain needs a reason to rewire. Music gives it meaning. Joy gives it urgency. Charlotte touched the keyboard gently, then turned to him. I've been thinking about funding. He blinked. Already I have a donor network that trusts me. If I put my name on it, they'll come. But only if you're in. Not as an employee, as a founder. Daniel felt the floor shift beneath him, not in fear, but in gravity. You'd really do that, I already am. The proposal was written that night, modest, but bold. A pilot program for an integrated rehabilitation center. The name they chose together, Rising Steps. No slogans, no grandeur, just a mission. Honor the whole child. Heal the whole family. Charlotte prepared the presentation for the foundation's board. Daniel would accompany her. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like someone helping from the outside. He felt like a man returning to his purpose. Before bed that night, Charlotte walked past Aurora's room. The door was cracked open. Inside, Aurora sat at the little keyboard, slowly playing a soft tune. Daniel had taught it to her. You are my sunshine. Charlotte listened as Aurora sang quietly, slightly off-key, but with full conviction. Please don't take my sunshine away. Tears rose unbidden in Charlotte's eyes. She stepped into the room, knelt beside her daughter, and hugged her tightly. Aurora looked up. Is something wrong? No, Charlotte whispered. For the first time in a long time. Nothing's wrong at all. In a home once filled with silence and control, there was now song. And in the hearts of two people once broken by loss, there was now something beginning. Not just healing, but hope shared. The auditorium smelled like paper programs and freshly waxed floors. Streamers and soft pastels hung above the small stage, where rows of chairs awaited an audience of proud parents and camera-ready relatives. It was the end-of-year celebration at Willow Ridge Academy. Aurora's first time attending a school function since her diagnosis. Charlotte sat in the second row, unusually still. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap were colder than they should have been. Daniel sat beside her suit jacket, slightly wrinkled hair combed back with something that tried to pass for formality. But even he looked tense, his fingers tapping an anxious rhythm on the fold of the program. On stage, children fidgeted in place, shifting in chairs, adjusting costume wings and paper crowns. Teachers bustled behind curtains, whispering cues and checking microphones. Aurora was backstage waiting, not in her wheelchair, standing. The idea had been hers. Weeks ago, after a particularly steady session, she'd looked at Daniel and said, "I want to walk across the stage." Just a few steps. Charlotte had frozen. The risk was obvious. A fall, a failed step, the weight of 100 eyes. But Daniel had only asked why Aurora had looked him straight in the eye. "Because I'm ready for the world to see what I can do." And that was that. They'd trained quietly, secretly. Daniel adjusted her braces. Charlotte found a lightweight dress that wouldn't tangle. Gwen arranged with the school to ensure safety protocols were in place, and now the moment had arrived. "Welcome, families and friends," the principal said brightly. "Today is a celebration of courage, kindness, and how far our students have come. Every child on this stage is a story of growth, and every family a testament to love." Charlotte barely heard the words. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She looked at Daniel. "What if she falls?" He answered without hesitation. "Then she learns how strong she is for trying." Charlotte nodded, jaw tight, eyes glassy. She wanted to believe that. She needed to. The first few skits passed in a blur. Children reciting poems, singing off-key lullabies, forgetting lines and earning applause anyway. And then the final act was announced, Aurora West, performing her original song, "Brave Like Me." The spotlight hit the center of the stage, and there she was. A hush fell over the room. Aurora stood at the edge of the curtain, holding a small microphone and a single walking stick. Her braces were visible beneath her soft blue dress. Her posture shook slightly, but she stood tall. Behind her, hidden in the wings, Daniel waited just in case. Charlotte gripped the seat. Aurora took a breath and stepped forward. One foot, then the other. The cane tapped once, twice. The audience didn't clap. Not yet. No one dared break the moment. Every adult in that room seemed to hold their breath because they saw what Charlotte saw, a miracle in motion. Aurora reached center stage and stopped. She lifted the microphone. Her voice, clear, sweet, and full of small, certain power, filled the room. "Once I was a dreamer, but afraid to try. Thought my legs were broken. Thought that hope could lie." Charlotte covered her mouth. Daniel blinked rapidly, but someone knelt beside me, whispered, "You can be everything you're made for. Brave like me." By the final note, no one was silent anymore. The entire auditorium rose to their feet, in tears and thunderous applause. Aurora smiled, small, shy but radiant. Then she turned toward the wings and motioned. Daniel stepped out slowly, almost uncertain. Aurora reached for his hand and lifted it high like a champion boxer. The crowd roared louder. And then, as if choreographed by something greater than training or planning or human, she turned to the audience and bowed. Later, backstage, after 100 hugs and photos, Charlotte pulled Aurora into her arms and whispered, "You were everything I didn't know I needed to see." Aurora, exhausted but proud, said, "I'm just me." Charlotte kissed her forehead. "That's more than enough." Daniel stood nearby, his eyes soft. Charlotte turned to him. "You didn't just help her walk." "She helped herself," he said. "You helped me walk too," she added, quieter now. "In ways I can't put into words." Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a folded slip of paper. He handed it to her. "What's this?" "It's a letter," he said. "But not one I wrote. Aurora gave it to me this morning. Said I should read it after she performed. But I think you should." Charlotte unfolded it. Aurora's handwriting, messy and heart-shaped. "Dear Mommy, today I'm going to walk, but I'm not walking alone. You believed in me before I did, and when I was scared, you let Mr. Daniel whisper to my legs. That's what love is. Not pushing, just staying. I love you. You're a brave girl, Aurora." Charlotte pressed the note to her chest, and in that moment, she realized something deep and irrevocable. This wasn't just about Aurora walking. It was about all of them learning step by trembling step how to walk through the wreckage of grief and into the wide, terrifying, beautiful space of beginning again. Together, snow came 2 days after the performance. Not a storm, just a hush. The kind that draped itself softly over rooftops and trees like a quiet benediction. Charlotte watched it fall from her kitchen window, hands wrapped around a mug of cinnamon tea. The house was still. Aurora was napping. Daniel hadn't arrived yet. And for the first time in years, the stillness wasn't empty. It was full of warmth of memory, of breath not held in fear, but released in peace. She moved through the house slowly, not out of fatigue, but intention. Every step held meaning now. Every space echoed differently. The corners no longer whispered grief. They hummed with afterlight, the kind that comes when someone has walked through the fire and survived. In her home office, the framed certificate from Harvard Medical School still hung where it always had, but it no longer felt like armor, just history. And on the same wall now hung something new, a sketch Aurora had made last week. 3 figures, a woman, a girl, and a man. Each standing, each smiling. No one perfect, but no one alone. Daniel arrived an hour later, snowflakes still clinging to his coat. "You look like a Christmas card," Charlotte said, handing him a towel. He laughed. "Only if the theme is man lost in storm." She watched as he dusted off his boots and shook the cold from his hair. "You're early," she added. "I couldn't stay away." There was no teasing in his tone, just honesty, soft and full. Charlotte gestured toward the living room. "Fire's on. Sit." They moved toward the couch. He sat first, arms relaxed over his knees, the kind of posture that suggested he wasn't guarding himself anymore. Charlotte sat beside him, not close enough to touch, but near enough to share the heat of the fire. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment. She waited. "I think I'm ready. For what?" "To go back," he said. "To Oregon. To the house. To her grave." Charlotte turned toward him, surprised. After all this time, he nodded. "I used to think staying away meant moving on, but now I know. It just meant I hadn't moved through." She reached over and touched his hand. Just a grace. But enough. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I think Sophie would be too." A pause. "I'd like to take Aurora with me," he added. "If you're comfortable?" Charlotte blinked. "Really? She's the reason I can go back. She deserves to see where this started." Charlotte nodded slowly. "Then I think she would be honored." The trip was quiet. Daniel drove Charlotte beside him, Aurora curled up in the back with a sketch pad and her favorite blanket. Snow turned to drizzle as they left the city, and by the time they reached the Oregon coast, the skies had cleared to a muted gray. The house was small, a single-story cottage with cedar shingles and a wind chime that hadn't rung in years. Daniel unlocked the door and stepped inside first. Nothing had changed, and everything had changed. The treehouse out back still stood unfinished, but intact. The walls held pictures of Sophie drawings on the fridge, a pair of shoes, too small for anyone now. Dust shimmered in the soft afternoon light. Charlotte stayed back, giving him space. Daniel moved slowly, touching frames, letting memories rise like mist. Then finally, he walked outside down the hill behind the house to the small grove of evergreens. The headstone was simple. Sophie Elise Cooper, 2009, 2016. You made us brave. Aurora stood beside him, quiet. Daniel crouched and placed a single seashell at the base of the stone. "She used to collect these," he said. "Thought they were tiny treasure maps." Aurora looked up. "I brought something too." From her coat pocket, she pulled out the drawing, the one of her walking on stage. "I want her to have it," she whispered. Daniel smiled, eyes glassy. She'd love that. Charlotte stood at a distance, watching the two of them, man and girl mentor, and miracle grief and growth, sharing a moment that spanned time and space and sorrow. That evening back at the cottage, they lit a fire. Aurora curled up with a book, and Charlotte joined Daniel on the porch, 2 blankets draped over their legs. "I used to think the only way to survive loss," Charlotte said quietly, "was to keep building. Higher, louder, bigger, until I drowned out the silence." Daniel nodded. "I thought surviving meant disappearing." And now she asked, "I think it means being willing to stay." She looked at him, eyes reflecting the flickering light. "What do you want to build now?" He reached over and took her hand, not by accident, not gently, but with intention. "Something rooted," he said. "Something that doesn't need to be loud, to be strong." Charlotte rested her head on his shoulder. Outside, the wind stirred the chimes for the first time in years. In a home that had once held only echoes, now there was laughter music, and the murmur of voices that no longer feared the silence. Not every hole had been filled, but every wound had been witnessed. And in that witnessing, something extraordinary had happened. They had begun to live again. Spring arrived without announcement. No fireworks, no grand fanfare, just the quiet green blush on trees, once bare, the smell of wet soil softening beneath sun, and birds returning to sing in voices not heard since autumn. At the West Estate, life had found its rhythm again, but not the same rhythm as before. Something slower, softer, wiser, more real. On a warm Saturday morning, Charlotte stood at the edge of a large lot on the city's east side. The soil had been leveled, marked with flags and string. Surveyors milled around with clipboards and tape measures. At the far end, a large temporary sign read, "Coming soon. Rising Steps, Integrated Rehabilitation Center." A place where children don't just recover, they rise. Daniel stood beside her, arms crossed, smiling as if he didn't quite believe it yet. "I keep expecting someone to tell me I'm dreaming," he said. Charlotte glanced at him. "If you were then, so am I." He looked around. 6 months ago, we were measuring progress in inches. And now, she said, we're planting acres. The groundbreaking ceremony would be held next week. Donors, families, press, everyone would be there. It would be Charlotte's first public appearance since the media storm. But this time, she wasn't hiding behind numbers or talking points. She was standing for something, for someone, for herself. That afternoon back at home, Aurora practiced on the small piano in the sunroom. She had composed a new piece, no lyrics this time, just soft notes that rose and fell like breath. She called it Trustfall. When she played, she closed her eyes. When she finished, she looked up and said, "Can I play this at the ceremony?" Charlotte blinked back emotion. "Of course, sweetheart." Daniel leaned in from the doorway. "Just remember, your biggest fans expect an encore." Aurora grinned. "As long as you sit in the front row." Charlotte reached over and squeezed Daniel's hand. He didn't let go. That night, Charlotte took down the last unopened box from her office closet. It had been sealed since the week she stepped away from surgery. Inside her old nameplate, her surgical ID badge, a few photos of her younger self in scrubs, stern, focused, driven. She looked at them now and whispered, "Thank you, but I'm not her anymore." Then she placed the nameplate back in the box and set it on the shelf, not to bury the past, but to honor it. In the mirror, she caught her reflection. Same face, but no longer afraid to be seen. A week later, on the morning of the ceremony, Charlotte stood at the podium facing a crowd of nearly 200. Behind her, the construction site banner fluttering in the spring breeze. Beside her, Daniel and Aurora. She wore a soft green dress, not the power suit everyone expected. Her voice when she began to speak wasn't loud, but it carried. 6 years ago, my daughter lost the use of her legs, and I lost my faith in medicine, in healing, even in myself. She paused. Then someone came into our lives who didn't promise miracles. He simply stayed. He knelt. He listened. And by doing so, he helped us walk again, each in our own way. She looked at Daniel. He didn't look away. Charlotte turned back to the crowd. We built Rising Steps not as a medical facility, but as a community of belief, where recovery is measured not only by movement, but by meaning. Where children are more than charts. Where hope isn't abstract, it's practiced. Applause rose. Tears shone in more than a few eyes. And then came Aurora, stepping to the stage. She sat at the keyboard and began to play. Her fingers moved with grace and purpose. The melody drifted across the space like something old and new, all at once fragile, but certain quiet, but commanding. It was a song of grief and joy, of small steps and brave choices, of pain honored and hope embraced. It was a song of becoming. When she finished, the crowd rose to their feet, but Aurora didn't bow. Instead, she turned to Daniel, and Charlotte smiled and whispered, "This was for both of you." They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They just held her together. That evening, after the crowd had gone and the grounds had quieted, Charlotte, Daniel, and Aurora walked the perimeter of the Future Center. The sky was streaked with gold. The air smelled like promise. You know, Daniel said if you'd asked me a year ago where I saw myself today, you wouldn't have said standing here. Charlotte finished. No, he said, but I would have hoped I was still alive enough to care. She looked at him, and now he smiled. Now I know I'm alive because I care. She slipped her hand into his. They walked a while in silence. Then Aurora, skipping ahead of them, called out, "You guys are taking forever." "Come on," Daniel grinned. "You heard the boss." Charlotte laughed. "Yes, sir." And as they followed the girl who had taught them both to rise, neither of them felt like they were starting over. They were simply starting true, not from scratch, but from the place where trust had taken root. And now everything could grow, and that was the miracle of trust. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know where in the world are you watching from. Take a moment to share in the comments. It means more than you think to know this little corner of the internet is connecting kind souls across the globe. And if you'd like to walk with us through more stories of hope, healing, and quiet courage, feel free to subscribe. No pressure, just a gentle invitation to stay close. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for spending time with us today. Your presence, your time, and your trust are truly appreciated. Until next time, take care of yourself and those you love.